Well, I think we'll get started. Everyone, please do keep breathing. We're trying to circulate the air in the room. If you didn't brush this morning, please do breathe through your nose. Thank you for your attention. My name is Greg Newby. That's not a pun or anything. It really is, and was that name before the internet existed. Not a handle, not a joke. And I come to you currently from North Carolina in the United States. The topic for right now is hacker ethics, and it's an interesting topic, I think, in many ways. One of the things we wonder about sometimes is whether we're just imagining ethics and focusing on hacking. We also sometimes wonder if really sometimes ethics are just a way of making classes. We have the class of the script kiddies, which is somewhere down there, right? And we all know what we're talking about. And we have the wizards and all this stuff. And I don't know, maybe ethical and non-ethical is another category system that we might use to refer to other people and separate our group from their group a little bit, like the way the monkeys do in the forest. People do that too. What I'm going to try to do today is talk a little about the idea of ethics for hackers. And the sort of starting point that I'll offer for hackers is that the notion of ethics is something which is very much individual and also something which is very much learned. What I'll propose is that through our activities, such as writing software, writing code, or writing even documentation or stories or articles or other things, that we can instrument our ethics. What I mean by instrumenting, an instrument is something that causes something to happen. And part of the reason why we hack, at least part of the reason why we say we hack, is because we want to bring about some sort of change, some sort of social injustice perhaps, some sort of problem or some sort of security hole. And we'd like to bring that to the attention of the right people in order that that change can occur. One way of changing is with an instrument. And I'll suggest that if we use our code or our other activities as our instrument, we can also at the same time use it as the instrument of bringing about our ethical views and some of our goals for these social changes and so forth. So that's an overview of the talk, and I had a version with a URL, and I seem to have lost that one page. But a link to this will be added in to the web page of HAL over the next day or so, and it'll have my email address. You'll be able to find me, hopefully today. All right, let's go ahead and move forward. This is just plain HTML, by the way, so it's easy to see. If you care to, don't know exactly why you would, but if you care to review it later on. There won't be a quiz or anything, probably. So as I just mentioned, what we'd like to do is suggest a definition of personal ethics for hackers. And we're not going to try to say, or at least my point of view is that we're not going to try to say, some behavior is always bad, is always unethical, non-ethical, and this behavior is always good, is always ethical. I think that in our minds, we often have such a distinction. I think that people, individuals, are very good at making ethical decisions. Of course, you might not actually behave in an ethical fashion, but you know this is good, this is bad, ethical, non-ethical, perhaps in the pursuit of further goals, transcending some sort of immediate harm or problem. Individuals can make these decisions quite well. However, groups or larger cultural definitions have a tendency to be problematic. And I'll give you a slight story because with hacker ethics, it's a little difficult to come up with a great example of cultural definitions that isn't very sort of blatant, defining hackers as criminals versus non-criminals, that sort of thing. But a story that you might think about is censorship. And what we've discovered, I work in a school of information and library science, what we've discovered in the history of people providing books in libraries and similar activities, videotapes, videotape rental, that sort of thing, is that it's very simple for an individual, for example, a parent or maybe a school principal or a school teacher or any other individual, to decide that something is improper and should be censored. Something is, over that line between what should be permitted in a library, what should be collected in a library or a videotape store or so forth, and what should not. Well, as I say, this is a very easy decision for individuals to make, and if some of you are parents or you might be thinking about, what might go into a library, something like that, it's probably a very easy decision for you to study an item and say, oh, no good, not for my child, not for the school district, not for, my family, my father, or whatever, if you're thinking of buying a book. Or, okay, this is good. This has a purpose. This has a redeeming value. So for individuals, no problem, right? And yet, as I say, the story is that in libraries, for example, public libraries especially, school libraries especially, they can't instrument these. They can't say, all right, here's our set of rules for what's okay. They want to avoid obscenity, indecency, things like that, sexual content, violence. They say, okay, we come up with a set of rules, and the rules are usually no problem. They can come up with the rules, but then deciding which item meets or doesn't meet that set of rules is literally impossible. If it's more than one person that makes a decision, a committee, something like that, it just doesn't happen. So anyway, that's sort of a long-about way of saying that I think that ethics is something that's in the same boat, essentially. That's in the same group of items where it's very difficult to know or very difficult to define, I should say, objectively or with a set of rules that other people will agree on. Is this ethical? Is this non-ethical? Well, the reason why we want to speak about ethics, and possibly the reason why you're interested in ethics and here today, is because we use computers as a hobby, as a vocation, as a way of communicating with people and having a lot of fun and accomplishing goals. At the same time, though, we can possibly pursue some larger goals. So if we're in a situation where we have discovered let's say we discovered a new exploit on some system or some sort of security hole, or maybe we've thought of a new sort of virus, something along those lines. This is a situation where it could be destructive, as of course we hear about all the time in the news. Maybe it's also the opportunity to be constructive and have something that moves towards some of our goals. So I think that's why ethics are important, because we all have some, and we are also all doing something that we might call hacking at some level, presumably. That's why we're here. And can we put those together? And of course my suggestion is that we can. We'll talk momentarily about, just briefly really, about the idea that ethics are learned, and we learn them through communication. Communication is not only verbal, of course, it could be nonverbal or through following examples. And again, we'll talk a little bit about some positive outcomes. And what I'll set up here, it's not too explicit in this line on the sheet, on the projector, but let's say you write an exploit. You identify, imagine this, maybe a new hole in Microsoft Outlook. Could happen, right? Don't know. Well, if you discover that new hole and you decide to write yourself a little virus or a little worm, or maybe send out information so that others can make use of the information, you're in what sort of situation? A communication situation, right? You're either going to send out some code, which is basically our thoughts turned into ways that the machine can understand them, or you might send out a description or a file, saying what's going on. You might set up a web page. Might be anonymous, might not. Of course, we know that not all exploits are, first sort of pursued by releasing a virus or doing a denial of service attack, that type of thing. So this is communicating, and we have the opportunity in that communication to say not only here's a procedure, but also say here's what you might want to do with that procedure, and maybe even have some things that it will do kind of by default. Is that going to prevent people from misusing it, from modifying, say, your source code to do something destructive instead of just maybe informative? No. right? But it will certainly push it in one direction as opposed to in another direction or a neutral direction. A couple of notions of ethical behavior. I think we could probably come up with a fairly long list of do's and don'ts, and this is and this isn't ethical. These are a little vague, right? What's a higher goal? You know, is I don't know, it's the sort of situation is some sort of hurtful action that pursues something good, you know, a higher goal and therefore worth it and therefore ethical, or not, and who makes these types of decisions. So these are the sort of thing that we might see in, I don't know, in religion and learn them in school, but as I said earlier, deciding what is and what isn't, easy for individuals, hard for cultures, hard for groups. One of the things that I would characterize as a hacker approach, I wanted to say hacker ethic, but not to confuse, but a hacker approach, what might define a hacker, is someone who is interested in transcending or going beyond the norm, going beyond what's established, exploring a very strong sense of curiosity, often valuing things like freedom of information and freedom of expression. And I think that we could characterize all of those as having something to do with ethics. Someone that pursues this might have some level of ethics. And I think really one of my starting points is that hackers usually are ethical, at least the ones that are doing things fairly actively. You know, not necessarily a hacker if we like to hang around on instant messenger or chat and kind of talk about computers and stuff like that. But if we're actually doing the exploration, coming up with new ideas, bringing together old ways of doing things, expressing curiosity and so forth, well, these are all the types of characteristics that we like to think of as defining hackers. Example here, civil disobedience, sort of direct action, which is the phrase where you say, all right, I'm tired of the paper company coming and cutting down the trees, and therefore I'll go and sit in a tree and stop them. I'll go and tie myself to the bulldozer. I'll go and destroy the chainsaws or the bulldozers. So is this ethical or not ethical? Well, depends on who you ask, right? You ask the paper company, you get a different answer than if you ask an environmentalist. And the people in this room probably all have different answers as well with that example. Is that ethical, not so ethical, somewhere in between? We might need more information even to make that kind of decision about motivations, personal background. We don't all behave ethically. I think most of us probably believe that we're overall, on the whole, generally good people. I think most people believe that. And that generally, overall, we tend to behave in an ethical manner, in an appropriate manner, in an honest manner, and so forth. But of course, we don't always. You know, who thinks that they're not, you know, occasionally behaving against the way that either you would like to or believe is appropriate. So ethics isn't necessarily about what you do entirely. I think it's more essentially a philosophy, but it's a philosophy that's action-oriented because, you know, if you believe in something but never act on that belief or always act contrary to that belief, then there's something amiss there, right? I think the idea of thoughtful and reflective versus thoughtless and erratic is fairly important. Ethical behavior might be habit forming, except at least initially it's not going to happen all on its own. Any situation you can think of, you know, going to the store, going to, you know, ride your bicycle down the street, you have many options for pursuing what you might consider ethical and non-ethical behavior. And if you're thinking, reflecting, planning, looking at the consistency of action with belief, then that's a symptom anyway of ethical behavior. Well, I mentioned this earlier, the idea that we learn, and I think that that this is an important point because we learn, you know, to speak and to walk and so forth when we're home and young, And we also learn at the same time, maybe in our youngest 2, 5, 6, 8 years old, a lot about proper ways of interacting with the world. And one of the things you might know from child psychology is that youngsters, people actually around the age of 6, they want to have rules for everything. They want to have, they start going from sort of playing in an undirected fashion, sandcastles, things like that, to playing games with rules. So card games, board games, that type of thing. People like rules, and yet later on, of course, we find ourselves in situations where there's no rules, right? There's no rules for how to drive your bicycle down the street. Well, there are some rules, I guess, but there are no rules for where to go and what to do and so forth. Life is full of choices. And we learn through long experience what are the choices that are consistent with our personal beliefs, and we learn them so well, we don't think about them. Not much at all. So, you walk down the street, someone bumps into you, you don't need to think about your behavior. If you're the type of person that yells and bumps them back, you do that. If you're the type of person that apologizes or ignores them, you don't think about it. You just engage in behavior. So we're reflecting and thoughtful, and yet at the same time we're engaging in a lot of practice and getting more and more consistent with time. Now, here's a challenge. I said that children learn, and during our childhood years, teenage years, and of course adult years, we are always learning and encountering new experiences. But it's really only the younger generation now, and even then only to an extent, that's incorporating various online activities, computer-oriented activities with these sorts of rules which we learn when we're young. So what that means is when the first time you say, I can send fake email. I learned how to telnet to port 25. I can now pretend I'm someone else and hopefully won't get caught and so forth. Well, the first time when that happens, I'm sure to many of us we do something that's maybe a little stupid and maybe not so consistent with what we now know. Trivial example, might get caught, could get in trouble. But initially we don't have rules, right, or we don't have experience that tells us what to do. So what do we need to do? Well, of course, hackers learn by communicating for the most part. We all sit in front of our computers alone and work and try to solve problems. But we also communicate with others, chatting, mail, news groups, conferences, of course. So that's where we learn, right? And we're not just learning the behaviors, we're learning what's appropriate and what's good and what's bad about those behaviors. So what can we do? Well, we have a couple of maybe not so good options, and one that I think is a better option up here. We can make up our own ethics and just sort of play it by ear. We can say, okay, ethics doesn't apply because it's only email, it's only denial of service, it's only bringing down a server, it's not harming information, that type of thing. It's only a little money that I stole or something like that. The information was copied, it wasn't stolen, and so forth. And this is not real. Or, of course, what we can do, which I think is what a lot of us do unconsciously, but maybe don't consciously make an effort to do for other people, my suggestion here, is to give the signals, to communicate and say, well, either say or act or express yourself that here is an action, right? Launching a virus, talking about a new exploit, sharing information that you've encountered using some questionable means. So it's not just that, but also some sort of interpretation that we can provide. So, I don't know, I forward you a long document that I managed to get in a sneaky fashion from a school office, something like that. Well, what can I do? I can just forward it, or maybe I could forward with a few paragraphs that says what I think it means and what I think we should do and how I think this information might be interpreted. And If you do that, then you're exerting a force, right? People can ignore that. They can change the message, send their own message, but you've done something rather than doing nothing. And that's the idea of communicating our beliefs through our writings and our code. And I'll give an example of that. So instrumenting, as I said earlier, means we're doing something, right? There's some sort of mechanism. A lot of the times the mechanism is a computer program or something along those lines, a script or a set of steps or set of instructions. And as I said, it's not necessarily behavior, it's also maybe some values that are going along. So I'm sure that an experience everyone, if not almost everyone in the room has had, is to download some code somewhere that might do something. You know, so you download some code that might you know, bypass DVD security or might send anonymous email or so. You know, it might not be hacker code per se, it might be legitimate code. You know, code that does steganography or encryption or something along those lines. Well, what do you do? Well, if there's documentation, you probably read the documentation. If there's source code, you might look at the source code. Certainly you compile it the first time if necessary, or the first time you run it. Chances are you might give a help option, something like that, or just run it, see what happens. Okay? So this is what we do at the receiving end. At the sending end, what can we do? Well, we can write those comments. We can put in that default behavior, right? So, okay, we're going to do a flood ping attack. Write some code that'll, you know, just send out a bunch of packets and hope that that does a little harm to the network. Well, what can we do? We can program in the default host to be www.whitehouse.gov, or we can make it localhost, right? There's a value decision there. In both cases, the software works. You can point it at whitehouse.gov or CIA.gov or whatever organization you decide maybe should be a target. But as the author, you get to decide what the defaults are, what's easy, what's not so easy. And do we see examples of this? Yeah. You know, we see examples of, I think, very much value-laden, very much activity which communicates and tries to instrument the ethics of the sometimes organizations, sometimes individuals involved. And I have a couple of examples of these, and they're all, I think, pretty familiar. If you haven't read the couple of lower links, and it's probably time. 2600 magazine, many of you I'm sure have looked at the website, and the website of course is where there's a lot of information about, you know, as we heard this morning, about the, you know, the Ford GM cases and the DVD lawsuit and so forth. But what I'm thinking of is the magazine, and I don't know how many people read the magazine on a regular basis. But look in the letters next time you do, or if you read it, you probably read them regularly. In the letters, which are mostly answered by Emmanuel, who we heard this morning, there is very much a trend in the answers, which is towards freedom of information, which is something he believes in and the magazine stands for, and essentially ethical behavior. So when people say, hey, I discovered this new exploit, they get congratulated for sharing that. They get, you know, told that, hey, this is good because now the people out there will, you know, fix this problem, we'll have better products and so forth. And that's like a pat on the back, right, from Emmanuel. It says, this is good behavior. And when people say, hey, I found this new exploit and I used it to trash my school's computer system, you know, or I used it to, you know, put up some picture on my boss's computer screen or something like that, you read the answer, and the answer is basically critical. It says this is not good behavior. Thanks for the thanks for the information. Thanks for sharing. But if you think this is funny, then we disagree. You know, it's just not. It doesn't fit. And this is really a very strong message. And I think it's actually geared. I don't know what the average age of the 2600 magazine, but it's certainly geared towards younger people. I think a lot of younger people write those in their teenage years, and it's what I said before, right? You don't have training when you're growing up to decide, well, what's right? Okay, I have some access, you know, in school or at work or something like that. I've discovered a way of getting, you know, something which is hidden, and what do I do? Right? So without the background and the history and the experience you might do something which someone who does have that background, history, and experience, in this case 2600 Magazine, can interpret and say, hey, you know, not so good, not such a good move. And these are actually all links. Of course, 2600 we're familiar with. If you haven't, oops, this is not on the network right now. Didn't mean to click that. If you haven't yet read the Hacktivismo, you should. This is the Cult of the Dead Cow. They did Back Orifice, and they're working on their Pika Booty project. All you have to do is read about 2 paragraphs by these guys. And of course, they're individuals. You know, they have somewhat different views and so forth. But essentially, they're very much trying to instrument ethical behavior, very much. Back Orifice, right? I don't know how much you might remember about Back Orifice. It's still around, but certainly not in the spotlight as much as it was. This is a very, it's a tool with very legitimate uses, with very legitimate purposes, extremely similar to other tools, and in the code, and you know, you might be able to get the code, make changes and so forth, but the way it comes out of the box is not really fit for doing what they, I suppose, consider to be unethical stuff, to be bad stuff. It's not so easy, certainly not the default implementation of Back Orifice, to set it up as a, you know, as a backdoor sniffer, you know, monitoring type of thing for someone who doesn't give you permission. Right? And yet it has all those capabilities. So they made these decisions, I certainly think, consciously. And, this is the, I don't know if they characterize it this way, but it's sort of the geeky implementation, I think, of the some of the United Nations human rights documents, where they talk about basically, here's what we believe, here's what everyone should have, here's basic rights. In the United Nations, they talk about health care, they talk about freedom from religious oppression, freedom from slavery, things like that. CDC is talking mostly about freedom of information and freedom of expression and the ability of sharing information and data. And they're actually pretty specific in here. They take a stand on something that we might have different opinions on in this room. They say all information should not be free. You know, and other people might say, yes, all information should be free. And they're saying, oh, you know, the person that creates it should have all the rights in the world to withhold that information. And whether or not someone can then get access and do what they want is separate. So yeah, you know, their opinion, but through their tools and their writings, they are instrumenting that opinion. Eric S. Raymond, of course, is well known for a whole lot of different writings. And actually, if this were a live network, I would quickly go to the socially responsible programming. It's only, I don't know, 6 or 8 paragraphs, just a screen or a screen and a half of text. And essentially what he says in both of these documents, sort of succinctly and short in the first one and threaded through the dialogue in the second one, is that, that he believes that hackers, computer programmers that is, I think maybe he's having a limited definition, saying computer programmers who are hackers or computer programmers only, have some social responsibilities. If your boss, if you're a programmer working for hire and your boss tells you it's time to run a sniffer program or to check other people's email or something along those lines, then it's in your ethical interest to say no, or to quit that job, or to report, or to, you know, to take some sort of action, not to do it without question. Not necessarily not to do it, there's a lot of practical issues, but not to do it without thoughtfulness. I had a couple of examples here, not too specific, where maybe there could be. And I thought of the Freenet project, not to pick on it, because I think it's a great project, but Freenet, like some of the other projects going on now, are meant to be censor-proof. So actually there is clearly, you know, a belief system that's there. The idea that information can be made non-censorable, and the peekabooty is really the same type of activity. And yet, you know, partially because of the way it's developed, there's not a whole lot that goes along with that. You know, it's sharing information, but what are you sharing, right? There's no message that I'm aware of, maybe I've missed this, but that says, is there any reason why you might choose to share, let's say, a movie that you got on DVD and converted to another format, and do this in a way that's illegal, versus sharing some document that you write that maybe has some opinions and some ideas, and you're just sharing it with the world freely instead of trying to sell it or protect it or something like that. So two activities, and again, not to pick on them, and maybe it's in there, but this is something that they don't seem to distinguish very much in that project. And most of the viruses and worms, we hear about these very frequently. We'll continue to hear about them very frequently. And what's hacked by the Chinese? Where's the message there? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, there's some message, right? But it's not a message for, I suppose maybe they just wanted to let people know that Chinese were great hackers. Maybe that really was their message. But I mean, they're not saying, free China or better human rights or murder the Dalai Lama or whatever. It doesn't matter what their opinion is. There's just not much of a message there, right? And I think that's the case with most of the things that we see. And in fact, I didn't mention on the webpage here, but another example I thought of was attrition. A lot of people have, I'm sure over the years, looked at attrition.org, and they've essentially stopped mirroring defaced web pages. And one of the main reasons why that I read on the website, they did this, is because essentially they were boring and pointless. Of course, if you run some script, you'll eventually find a vulnerable server and you'll be able to root it or deface the web page or whatever, mess their CGI up, something like that. Of course, millions of servers, right? Choose a script, download it, run it. It's just boring. The publicity that the defacements got from being mirrored on attrition were much greater, more hits and so forth than they were getting at some little backwater site. And in most cases, I mean, numerically, we're talking well over 90% are just places you never heard of. And like I say, of course you can find small servers run by small companies that are vulnerable. And essentially, the people, or the guy that runs attrition, got tired of this. He thought it was not sending a message. If you deface a web page, then why not share a message, even if it's on a page that not that many people are going to see. And then, again, the message, oh, so and so is a lamer, and I'm cool and stuff like that. Okay, that's a message, right? It's not much of a message, and you have at least some opportunity if you're going to go to the effort of doing this. Doing this, whatever it is, rooting or web page defacement, you have the opportunity to write whatever you want, so why not make it count for something? And at this point, actually, when we're talking about the idea of course, naturally, you can find a site that you can break into using, without doing a whole lot of innovation. I mean, you might be doing innovation, but without doing a whole lot of innovation, you'll find a site using a couple of tools that you can exploit. One of the, on that point, what I want to point out is one of the distinctions between hacktivism, which we're not really talking about here, we're talking a little more about ethics, but I think there's a very strong tie-in there, and vandalism. And the definition that I like very much is that, generally speaking, again, it's hard to apply to all cases, but vandalism is when you don't choose your site, when you're opportunistic. Hacktivism is when you say, all right, Nike, you're going down, right? Whatever, the WIPO website or NATO or, whatever it is that you're interested in, you're the target, right? You're targeting, doing the work, doing the research, doing the homework. You do all that stuff, you probably are going to have a message, right? And actually when the Nike website did get hacked, that's what happened. Right? Is Nike run by, is the website run by a bunch of people that don't know anything and aren't really paying attention to their website? I doubt it. They might not be the sharpest or whatever, but it's a lot more active than, like I said, 99% of the places you see listed in the mirrors at attrition.org. So again, it's an opportunity to distinguish between the behavior that's consistent with ethics and maybe communicates and furthers your ideas about what should be, what could be, where we'd like to go in the world, and using that as an instrument for those changes, or just doing it sort of randomly, sort of blindly, sort of thoughtlessly, recklessly. So what can we do? Choose a goal, right? I don't care. I like the environment, so maybe that would be one of my ideas. You might have completely different ideas. You might want to cut down some more trees or kill the baby whales, or who knows. It's great, no problem. But identify that goal and you can work toward it. I'm very big, as a matter of fact, I have a workshop session tomorrow that if you want to be a hacker, learn to code, right? The code is your instrument. Doesn't matter, choose a language. You want to do Visual Basic, that's fine. C++, that's fine. Perl, that's fine. But learn to use the tool, the computer and related tools, cell phone, what have you. And you can use that tool just like any tool, hammer, or a screwdriver or something like that, to accomplish different types of goals, also to simply accomplish destruction, vandalism, so forth. And make it easy, right? Like I said, you write an exploit, you can add a couple of extra paragraphs, add a little commenting, add a little README file, maybe set up some sort of web page on GeoCities or something where it'll be hard for people to trace back to you, and not just the code, right? Not just the hammer, but instructions for how to use the hammer to build something that you think is worthwhile. And communicate, right? That's the sort of the message here. We have the opportunity when we're engaging in any behavior to send messages. You know, we're all very good. You know, even the ones that you might not want to get in front of a room and speak or anything like that, but we're all very good communicators. You know, we can communicate verbally, non-verbally, in written form, and if we're writing code, then we can communicate through the actions that code or the compiled code takes, and the comments, README files, stuff like that go along with it. So this is essentially an idea, not necessarily a recommendation, and we have a few minutes. We can sort of debate the point, but my idea and my proposal is that ethical behavior is something that's learned, that generally speaking at current generations, and the younger generations might be different, we don't learn a whole lot of good rules for deciding what's ethical or appropriate for activities involving online systems and writing code and things like that. You take a class at university, you might be doing the same exact program everyone else did last year, you know, doing a bubble sort or a tree or something like that. Well, it might sort of qualify as hacking, but usually we think of the hacking as writing the programs that people haven't written before, or that combine things in novel ways, right? So we can use those as our instruments. And last, to sum up, to return to the previous point, it's our own definition, right? It's yourself that you need to please and look in the mirror in the morning, and you might be happy. I'm not trying to place a judgment, and I don't think others should either. You might be happy that you defaced a web page or did hacked by Chinese or something like that, and that's no problem. But you have an opportunity in your sort of hacking actions, like any actions, to decide something ethical, consistent with my ethics, something which furthers my goals. You don't be that analytical, of course, probably, but you might need to be at first. Or random action, convenient action, blind action. So that's the talk, and we have a few minutes for questions or comments, probably about 3 or 4. I'm sure some people might have opinions on hacker ethics. Yeah, please. How do I feel about enforced ethics? Or the moral majority. Yeah, well, I think the perspective of believing that ethics is something which is individual sort of speaks to that. I mean, I think that having, but there's a problem, right? But I think that basically having people enforcing their view on you is wrong. However, those people think it's right, and it's hard for me to tell them that they're wrong, even though I don't like it. So this is a problem, right? I think that I value, say, the moral majority's freedom of expression as much as anyone else's, but I sure wish I could keep them out of my face, right? And ad blocker, right? I mean, we have computers, we're hackers, we're programmers, okay? So we might not be able to, you know, well, maybe someday we could or we'd like to change the whole political process and, you know, do, you know, something that will hurt, say, the moral majority or whatever you want. But we can at least use our computers to either block stuff we don't want, or possibly, if we're going to go and try to take some sort of action, you know, run that, you know, new vulnerability exploit code or something, we might choose to do it in a way that sends the message that we want instead of, you know, doing nothing in that case. Yeah, please. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's the difference, right? And, you know, it may be not a patch, maybe, you know, maybe something else, maybe a, you know, some license keys to some software, you know, something like that. I mean, yeah, so this is a choice that might have been made by the original author or discoverer of the exploit. A lot of the times, the exploit is discovered and then it's someone else that writes the code, right? But somewhere along the line, someone made a decision. And why not? That's sort of my, you know, my starting out point is why not come up with something that's going to prove a point? I mean, do we need to prove that there are security holes in Outlook? You know, of course not. We know there's security holes in Outlook. Do we need to prove that, you know, there are buffer overflows somewhere in IIS? Of course not. You know, what's the point? Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, there's different aspects there because I think one of the issues is that's the sort of activity in the U.S. where all of a sudden you go from having like a very small crime to having a very large crime. You know, they say, oh, you know, we had 50 hours of systems administration and we needed backup tapes and $10,000 damage, and all of a sudden you're maybe in jail for 20 years. For doing something fairly minor like erasing a log. And that, I think that's pretty clearly not proportional. But otherwise, I mean, the question comes back to what I mentioned before, which is a means to an end, right? If, I mean, I think there's always a practice level. If you're new and you're first discovering a system, you might do some things which aren't fully consistent, you know, so do something that will cause a sysadmin some grief, or that will maybe destroy some data, cause a backup tape to be loaded in, that type of thing. But later on, if we're getting good at this, then just like, you know, you don't make decisions about walking down the street and what you do when you bump into somebody, you say, all right, you know, I need to delete the log so that I can get the message up and not get caught, and I can put the message up again. And that's different than saying I need to delete the log because I can, because, you know, I you know, wanted to put up my, you know, Simpsons cartoon or something like that, right? So it's a personal decision, though, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, please. I'm sorry, I'm all over on this side. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah, yeah. They don't understand. You know, they don't understand. And so, but what can we do, right? We can possibly, I mean, this is not so easy and they might misinterpret anyway, but we can at least try to get a message across that will be understood. And I think there are not so many efforts that you see, certainly in the news, that that are clear. I mean, look at the CDC stuff, right? They really are trying hard to get their message, and with some level of success. I saw some of the coverage of DEF CON, and not all journalists, but some of the journalists got it. You know, they said, wait a minute, this is not criminal, right? What's the FHQ T-shirt is, what is it? Criminal anarchist, anarchist criminal, something like that, right? They didn't choose that, what? Enemy of the anarchy, enemy of the state or something, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, they didn't characterize it that way. And if that same message hadn't been worked on so carefully, they probably would have. So I think you can succeed in some cases. Is there a question? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm glad I didn't say what I almost said. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think what I'm really trying to do, well, actually, I'm not sure if this addresses your questions. You might need to clarify. But what I'm really trying to do is take behavior and turn it into more directed, focused behavior, and say put the behavior may or may not happen, may or may not be appropriate. But if you're going to do it, then it should be something that is consistent and thoughtful and directed. Is that sort of what you're asking? Well, of course. I mean, to submit a program to the next conference, and here I am. This is my view, and next year or next week, I might have a different view. I think I'll always be of the opinion that these decisions are essentially individual, that everyone has a different interpretation, but there's also a shared consensus. So, for example, in 2600, all the time. You see the idea that, actually damaging something is different than just getting access. So, reading a file is one thing, destroying a file, maybe modifying it in a way that's going to be hard to find is another thing. I think my time's up. Okay, well, thank you very much, and this will be on the HAL website, and I enjoyed speaking with you today.